A cockroach movement just broke out in India. And no, it's not a pest control campaign. It's a protest movement led by an actual political party called the Cockroach Party. The Cockroach Party. Say what you want, but that name is definitely built to survive. Hey everyone, welcome back to Professor Her Room. I'm Olivia. Right now, one of the hottest protest movements on the planet is in India, and the party leading it is literally named the Cockroach Party. So today, we're digging into how that name came to be and how it snowballed into a crisis that shook the Prime Minister himself. For American viewers, here's a way to picture it. Imagine a satirical page called The Cockroach Party pops up out of nowhere, blows past the official follower counts of their Republican or Democratic National Committee within weeks, forces a cabinet secretary to resign, and rattles the president's entire political base. Basically, a meme account that actually took down part of a cabinet. Let's start at the very beginning, where this whole thing actually started. When people list the most education-obsessed countries in the world, South Korea and China usually come to mind first, but India absolutely belongs on that list too. Indian parents are known for pushing their kids' academics to an extreme degree, and just like in Korea, getting into medical school in India is treated like the holy grail. Think of it like this. Take Harvard Med's admission odds, multiply that by the pressure of the entire Ivy League application season, and then stack on the desperation of, if I don't become a doctor, I basically have no safe path left in life. In the US, if med school doesn't work out, there's still law school, startups, a dozen other career lanes. In India, becoming a doctor is seen as one of the very few guaranteed ladders out of poverty and into a better class. India has a med school entrance exam called NEET. Basically imagine the SAT and the MCAT rolled into one single test. More than 2 million students sit for it every single year. Across the entire country, there are only about 800 medical schools, with a combined total of roughly 137,000 seats. So out of 2 million applicants, more than 90% get rejected. That's a brutal, brutal ratio. Even though India is growing at breakneck speed as an economic power, income inequality is still severe, and there's a massive population living in poverty. For a lot of families, becoming a doctor is basically the closest thing to a guaranteed ticket to a stable, successful future. That's why so many young Indians chase medical school, and why parents will do anything to get their kids in. It's common for an entire family to sacrifice everything to back the one kid who shows real promise. Naturally, the private tutoring industry built around this is enormous. This year, everything blew up. Evidence surfaced that the NEET exam paper administered on May 3, 2026, had actually leaked before the test even took place. India's education minister, Dharmendra Pradhan, ended up canceling the exam and ordering a retest. But here's why this became such a massive deal. After the cancellation was announced, reports came out that at least 12 NEET test takers had died by suicide, overwhelmed by the news that their exam had been voided. Some outlets reported even higher numbers, but the confirmed figure was at least 12 young lives lost. Every person carries a different breaking point and a different kind of weight on their shoulders. Some of these kids had entire families betting everything on them. You're the smart one, go to med school and lift this family up. After years of grinding through cram schools, finally walking out of the exam thinking, I actually nailed it this time, only to be told the whole thing was scrapped and they had to do it all over again. That's the kind of gut punch that can feel like the sky is falling. And honestly, this wasn't even the first cheating scandal tied to NEET. Back in 2015, organized cheating was uncovered in the exam that preceded NEET. In 2021, cell phone-based cheating rings were caught. And in 2024, a regional paper leak happened too. But this was the first time the entire country, over 2 million test takers, had to retake the exam from scratch. Public anger boiled over. How many times does this have to happen before the Education Ministry actually does something about it? By pure coincidence, on the exact same day the exam cancellation was announced, May 15th, something else went down in an Indian courtroom. India's Chief Justice, Surya Kant, was reprimanding a lawyer in court and said something along the lines of, "Among the young people who can't find jobs and haven't established themselves in the legal field, some of them behave like cockroaches." The comment was aimed at people posing as experts without proper credentials, stirring things up through the media, public records requests, and social media. Once the remark blew up, the Chief Justice tried to walk it back, saying he wasn't calling all of India's youth cockroaches, just a small subset of unqualified people posing as experts to scam others. But not many people were buying that explanation. To put that in American terms, imagine a sitting Chief Justice of the Supreme Court saying something like, "Some of these unemployed kids these days are basically parasites." You can imagine how that would land. So, on the very same day, one story was about young people dying because of a broken system, and the other was about the country's top judicial official insulting that same generation. Those two stories colliding was the spark that made an entire generation's anger explode at once. The very next day, May 16th, a young man named Abhijit Deepke launched a website and social media accounts. He was a student at Boston University in the US and had previously worked on social media for one of India's opposition parties, AAP. It all started with a single post. What if the cockroaches banded together? The website and organization he built was called the CJP, the Cockroach Party. The ruling party, led by Prime Minister Modi, is the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party. The CJP is a direct, in-your-face parody of BJP. It's the American equivalent of someone founding a satirical party called the Cockroach Party, purely to mock the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. The CJP's original slogan was "Voice of the Lazy and Unemployed." Even the membership requirements were a joke. You had to be lazy, unemployed, and a full-time professional complainer. It was obviously self-deprecating satire, but the kind that lands like a well-placed jab. The response was explosive from the moment it launched. Within 78 hours, the Instagram account passed 3 million followers. Within 4 days, it had overtaken the ruling BJP's official Instagram account, which had around 8.7 million followers. By day 5, May 21st, followers had blown past 10 million, and not long after that, it hit 20 million. An account with barely 50 posts had outfollowed the official page of the largest ruling party on Earth. That didn't immediately translate into street protests, though. It needed a trigger, and that trigger arrived soon enough. The CJP's X account and its official website were both blocked one after another. CJP cried government censorship and pushed back hard. Founder Deepke put it this way, "Looks like the government blocked us. I don't know what's so scary about a cockroach." Then he added, "But cockroaches don't die. They've survived for over 300 million years." To this day, the CJP website still carries the line, "Cockroaches have existed over 300 million years." On June 6th, the first protest kicked off at Jantar Mantar in New Delhi. Jantar Mantar is an 18th century astronomical observatory site that today doubles as India's officially designated legal protest ground. Think of it as India's version of the National Mall in DC, a symbolic spot where, yes, you're allowed to protest here. From this point forward, CJP stopped being just a meme account and became a full-fledged organized movement, teaming up with student activist groups. That's when another major spark joined the fire: Sonam Wangchuk. He's a famous engineer, education reformer, and environmental activist from Ladakh, with huge influence across India. He's also widely known as the real-life inspiration behind the engineer character in the 2009 film 3 Idiots. Wangchuk threw his support behind the Cockroach Movement. Wangchuk himself isn't exactly young by any stretch, but once a public figure of his stature joined in, the movement expanded far beyond just the exam leak into youth unemployment, inequality, and systemic unfairness. Wangchuk called himself an honorary cockroach. Wangchuk began a hunger strike on June 28th. On day 20 of the strike, July 18th, Indian police forcibly transported him to a hospital, citing his deteriorating health. This sparked serious outrage among the protesting youth. 20 days into a hunger strike, the body's obviously taking a beating. So why did getting him to a hospital become the controversy? Because just 2 days later, on July 20th, protesters had a march planned toward Parliament. From the protesters' perspective, this wasn't the government caring about Wangchuk's health, it was the government pulling their symbolic leader off the board right before the big march. Wangchuk's family claimed he hadn't been in serious danger up to that point. Then, suddenly, police said his condition had turned critical overnight, took him away, and reportedly even covered his face with a white cloth during transport. CJP described it as the secret police smuggling him away. Authorities, for their part, said the transfer was made under medical guidance and a court order. For American viewers, this part might actually feel familiar. The hunger strike as a form of protest traces back to Gandhi's nonviolent resistance movement and remains a long-standing tradition in Indian politics. Wangchuk kept his strike going even in the hospital and finally ended it after 26 total days on July 24th, following mediation by several members of parliament. With Wangchuk hospitalized, his wife stepped in to lead the scheduled march on Parliament in his place. An enormous crowd turned out that day, and it ended in a clash. Delhi police set up barricades around Jantar Mantar to block the march toward Parliament outright. Protesters tried to push through, physical clashes broke out with police, and officers used tear gas and batons to disperse the crowd. Police reported around 180 injuries total from the clash, 118 officers and 60 protesters. CJP, on the other hand, claimed the opposite, that more than 150 protesters alone ended up needing hospital treatment. This protest ranked among the largest against the Modi government in recent years. Around this same time, another major incident occurred. A broadcast journalist was assaulted. In India, mainstream outlets seen as overly friendly to the government are nicknamed Godi media. In Hindi, Godi means lap, like a lapdog sitting on its owner's knee. In American terms, this is basically the lapdog press. Naturally, young protesters harbored deep distrust and anger toward these outlets. On July 21, Times Now journalist Dev Kotak was covering the protests at Jantar Mantar when he was surrounded and beaten by a crowd of hundreds chanting Godi media. Kotak said his clothes were torn and his glasses, watch, and phone were all taken. Beyond this incident, there were repeated reports throughout the protests of journalists from various outlets being threatened, assaulted, or subjected to harassment while covering the story. To be clear, actual violence like this was an extreme, isolated case, but heckling and hurling insults at mainstream journalists on the scene, chanting Godi media at them, reportedly happened constantly throughout the protests. On July 25th, Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan finally resigned. He said he was stepping down to prevent further division in the country and to make sure not a single student gets caught up in legal disputes. CJP immediately celebrated the win and announced it would pause the protests. The very next day, Prime Minister Modi announced the formation of a committee to overhaul the entire testing system. 2 days after that, on July 27th, the Indian government introduced an amendment to the Public Exams Act in the Lok Sabha, sharply increasing penalties for cheating. The bill includes up to 10 years in prison and fines in the ballpark of roughly $750,000 for organized exam fraud, along with the creation of dedicated fast-track courts. The bill passed the lower house just days later. The Cockroach Movement had fully crossed over into hard politics at this point. There are two big reasons this protest matters. First, it actually forced a sitting cabinet minister out of office. Second, it stands as one of the very few times since Modi took power in 2014 that anyone has directly challenged his authority and actually made the government back down under public pressure. Have you noticed how many youth-led protests have been popping up lately? Nepal, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Madagascar, Georgia, Serbia, Bulgaria, India, and even South Korea. Over the past few years, young people-led protests have been noticeably surging all across the globe, enough that some people are calling this era the age of Gen Z protests. There's a common assumption that young people don't care about politics, usually chalked up to a lack of political or social experience. But the fact that Gen Z keeps ending up at the center of these massive movements is a pretty striking pattern. You probably remember some of these. In Nepal, protests against a 2025 social media ban snowballed into a movement against corruption, youth unemployment, and nepotistic hiring for the children of politicians and elites, and ultimately toppled the government. In Madagascar, sections of the military joined the protesters, and the president was ousted. In Bulgaria, the prime minister stepped down after massive demonstrations. And in India, as we just covered, it was the education minister. So why is young people's anger boiling over across the world right now? And why are they the ones leading these charges? The specifics do vary from country to country. In developing nations, it's often economic hardship and poverty, while in wealthier countries, it tends to involve issues like immigration. Even here in the US, we keep hearing about growing frustration among young people over student loan debt, skyrocketing housing costs, and an unstable job market. In South Korea, young people directly led protests after a case where a constitutionally guaranteed right to vote wasn't properly upheld during a recent local election. But if you had to boil it down to one universal thread, it comes back to a bleak present and an uncertain future, and the basic struggle to make ends meet. With the future looking this uncertain, what's really exploded is anger at an older generation and a political establishment that seems unwilling to sacrifice anything or leave anything behind for the next generation. The feeling is they're handing us a future full of anxiety and hopelessness, while they sit comfortably on everything they've already secured for themselves. This wave of youth protest sweeping the globe might really just be exhausted young people, worn down by a brutal reality, reaching out for the one thing they still have left to hold on to: hope. You could also read it as young people simply being sick and tired of an establishment and a political class that protects its own interests while sacrificing nothing for the generation coming up behind them. And honestly, when it comes to that kind of self-serving establishment, does it really matter whether it leans left or right? Still, there's one thing worth remembering. Time will keep moving forward, one way or another, and the day this generation finally becomes the ones running the show, that day is coming. It's inevitable.